My fingers were already wrapped around my car keys when my phone lit up on the kitchen counter. I almost didn't see it. I was running 7 minutes behind, my blazer half buttoned, a granola bar hanging out of my mouth because I hadn't eaten a real meal since Tuesday. The message was from my father's attorney, a man I had known since I was 11 years old, a man who had never once, in 20 years, sent me anything other than formal letters on cream-colored letterhead. It was a text, 3 sentences, no punctuation except a period at the very end, which somehow made it worse. Do not go to that meeting. I need you to call me before you leave your apartment. This is not a scheduling conflict. I stood there with my keys cutting into my palm and read it 3 more times. Before I could process a single word, a second notification slid down from the top of my screen. My stepmother, her name lighting up my phone like it always did, at exactly the wrong moment. We're all here waiting, sweetheart. Don't be nervous. This is just family. The word family landed in my stomach like a stone dropped into still water. I set my keys down on the counter. I took the granola bar out of my mouth. And I called him. He answered before the first ring finished. But before I tell you what he said, and before I tell you what my stepmother had planned for me in that hotel conference room, drop a comment below. Have you ever walked into a room and felt, somewhere deep in your gut, that something was wrong before you could name a single reason why? That the smiles were too wide and the welcome was too warm and everything was just slightly off, like a painting hung crooked on the wall? Tell me, because I know I am not the only one. He didn't say hello. He said, "How far are you from your car?" "Still in my apartment," I said. "What is going on?" "Good." I heard him exhale, and that single breath told me everything about how serious this was, because this was a man who had negotiated corporate mergers without raising his voice. Listen to me very carefully. I got a call this morning from a colleague of mine at Hargrove Family Law. She handles conservatorship cases. She recognized your stepmother's name in a filing that crossed her desk yesterday, and she called me immediately. I didn't speak. My kitchen felt very small. Your stepmother isn't going to this meeting to discuss the estate amicably. She filed a petition 2 weeks ago to have you declared legally incapacitated, permanently. She hired a psychologist, and I use that term loosely, whose entire practice exists on paper. He has never treated a patient in a clinical setting. He has, however, signed 6 similar declarations in the last 4 years, all for clients represented by the same attorney your stepmother hired. I sat down on my kitchen floor. I didn't decide to. My legs just stopped working. The meeting tonight is not a mediation, he continued. There will be witnesses present who have already been briefed to corroborate a narrative of erratic, unstable behavior. The plan is to document what happens in that room and use it to support the petition. If you walk in there and anything you say or do can be framed as irrational and they will make sure something can be, she has the foundation for an emergency hearing. You are 6 weeks from your 30th birthday. That is when the controlling interest in your father's firm transfers to you outright. She cannot wait for a standard court timeline. My father had built that company from nothing. 16 years. A boutique creative agency that now held contracts with 3 national brands and had 31 employees who came to work every day because he had made something worth coming to. He had spent the last year of his life updating the succession documents, specifically so the firm would pass to me intact, so nothing could be picked apart or contested. He had sat across from me at his kitchen table 8 months before he died and said, "I'm not leaving you money. I'm leaving you something that works. Don't let anyone convince you that you can't run it." I had not let myself cry about him yet. I was crying now. "She's been doing this for 2 years, I said, and my voice came out in a shape I didn't recognize. Flat, like something being compressed. All of it. All the emails I swore I sent that disappeared. The meeting with the Callaway account where I showed up on the wrong day and lost the contract. My laptop that kept crashing right before presentations. It wasn't just bad luck. No, he said quietly. It wasn't. Because my stepmother had access. She had moved into my father's house 18 months after they married, and when he got sick, I had given her the alarm codes, the spare keys, the Wi-Fi password, the login to the household calendar system because she was his wife, and I thought we were family. She had been in my apartment twice to water the plants while I traveled for work. She had stood at my kitchen counter with a key I had cut for her and a look on her face that I had read as grief and now understood as something else entirely. Every time something went wrong, the missed deadline, the forgotten call, the morning I showed up to my own performance review on the wrong floor of the building and stood in a lobby for 20 minutes, convinced I was losing my mind, she had been there. She had been the first person I called. She had listened with her voice full of careful, practiced sadness, and said the same thing in 17 different ways. You have always struggled with this. Your father worried about you. You should talk to someone. I'm concerned. I had believed her. I had gone to therapy twice and spent 4 sessions trying to explain to a stranger why I kept making careless mistakes, why I felt like I was constantly one step behind myself, why I sometimes looked at my own calendar and felt like the information on it was written in a language I used to speak fluently and had somehow forgotten. My therapist had told me I was grieving and under extreme stress. She was right, but she didn't know that the stress had an architect. I wasn't falling apart. I was being taken apart, piece by piece, meeting by meeting, password reset by password reset, until my stepmother had assembled a very convincing portrait of a young woman who could not be trusted to manage her own affairs, let alone a multi-million-dollar company. And I had handed her every single brushstroke. "Are you there?" he asked. "I'm here," I said. I was still on my kitchen floor. The tile was cold through my slacks. "I need you to help me end this tonight." There was a pause. "You want to go?" "I want to finish it. If I don't show up, she tries again next month. She files an emergency petition. She shows up at the office. She gets to my father's employees and plants doubt. I need her to play out the whole hand so there's nothing left to play." He was quiet for 4 seconds. I counted. "I need 2 hours," he said. "Don't leave yet." I hung up and sat on my kitchen floor and started to think. Not the panicked, circular thinking I had been drowning in for the past 2 years, the kind where every thought leads back to the same question, which is, what is wrong with me? This was different. This was clean and cold and very, very focused. It felt like the moment your vision sharpens right before something important, like the world pressing in close and going still. My first call was to a medical testing center that offered same-day appointments for corporate drug and alcohol screenings. I explained I needed a full panel plus a psychiatric baseline evaluation, time-stamped and certified, within the next 90 minutes. The woman on the phone hesitated at the timeline. I told her I would pay double. She told me to come in immediately. An hour and 40 minutes later, I walked out with a sealed, notarized document confirming that I was fully sober, cognitively oriented, and showed no indicators of any psychiatric emergency. The timestamp read 6:14 p.m. The meeting was at 8. I sat in my car in the parking garage and made the call I'd been turning over in my mind since I hung up with the attorney. My stepsister answered on the second ring. She was 16. She had her mother's bone structure and her father's eyes, and those eyes had always told me more than she was allowed to say out loud. I had watched her for 2 years become quieter and smaller in every room her mother occupied, folding herself down to the size of something that wouldn't be noticed. "Are you coming?" she whispered. Not hello, just that. The whisper told me everything about where her mother was. "I'm coming," I said, "but I need you to do something first. Don't say yes until you understand what I'm asking." "Okay. Is there a water pitcher on the credenza? The crystal one your mother always sets out?" "Yes. She put it there an hour ago. She told me it was sparkling water, but it smells weird, like the cleaning supply cabinet." My grip tightened on the steering wheel. "It's not water. Listen to me. Go to the bathroom on the 2nd floor, not the one downstairs. She might hear you. Take the pitcher with you when no one is watching. Dump it. Rinse it twice. Fill it with plain tap water from the sink. Then put it back exactly where it was." A silence stretched over the line. I could hear her breathing. "She'll know," she finally said. "She checks everything. She'll check the pitcher last because she's going to be focused on everything else. You have a window. Maybe 5 minutes while she's briefing Dr. Ellison in the back office." "Who is Dr. Ellison?" "Someone who is going to have a very bad night. Can you do this?" Another silence, longer this time, and I held my own breath, waiting inside it. Then, very quietly, "Yeah, I can do it. Delete this call the second we hang up. I love you. I'll see you in an hour." I started the engine. The drive was 45 minutes on the interstate, through the part of the city where the lights get dense and orange and everything looks like a photograph of somewhere important. I had driven this route 100 times to visit my father, and it had always felt like going home. Tonight it felt like something else. Not fear, exactly. More like the feeling before a storm, when the air pressure changes and the trees go still and every living thing seems to understand that something is coming. My stepmother had chosen a hotel conference room for the meeting, which she had framed to me as a neutral location, a gesture of good faith. She had sent me a calendar invitation with a note that said, "I think it's easier to talk somewhere that doesn't carry so much memory for both of us." I had read that sentence and felt something like gratitude. Now I understood it differently. A hotel conference room had security cameras. Witnesses. Staff who could be instructed to note anything unusual. It had an attached medical suite 2 floors up that my attorney had confirmed had been reserved under a name belonging to a private transport and patient care company that specialized in, as their website described it, voluntary and involuntary psychiatric relocation services. She had thought of everything. She really had. What she had not thought of was that I had spent the last 4 years learning to build things under pressure, the same way my father had, by staying calm and working the problem from the outside in. She had mistaken my grief for incompetence and my trust for stupidity, and she had spent 2 years breaking down my confidence so thoroughly that she believed she had also broken my ability to think. She was wrong about that. I pulled into the hotel parking structure and checked my bag one more time. The certified medical document in a sealed envelope. A small personal recording device. Legal in this state for single-party consent. My phone connected to my attorney's secure line, which had been live streaming to his laptop for the past 20 minutes. And in the lining pocket of my blazer, the thing I had asked my attorney to arrange while I was at the medical center. A direct communication channel to the hotel's head of security, who had been briefed, quietly, by law enforcement that was already on site. I checked my reflection in the visor mirror. I looked like myself. I looked, actually, better than I had in months, clearer, more present, the kind of focus that sits behind your eyes and makes them still. I did not look like a woman in crisis. I looked like a woman who had done her homework. I walked into the lobby and took the elevator to the 4th floor. My stepmother was standing outside the conference room when the elevator doors opened, and for a moment I saw her before she saw me, which was a gift I hadn't expected. She was wearing a charcoal wrap dress and the small pearl earrings she always wore to things she considered important. She was speaking to a man I didn't know in a low, rapid undertone. Her hand on his forearm and the expression on her face was not the expression of a woman waiting nervously for a difficult family conversation. It was the expression of someone running a final systems check. Then she looked up and saw me, and the transformation was immediate and complete. Her face reorganized itself into warmth so fast it would have been impressive if it hadn't been so deeply, chillingly practiced. "There she is," she said, and her arms came open. I was starting to worry. "You didn't text." I let her hug me. I kept my arms at my sides, just long enough to register as slightly off, just the way someone anxious and uncertain might hold themselves. I had decided on the drive over to give her exactly what she was expecting. The fragile, distracted version of me she had been carefully constructing. It would keep her relaxed. Relaxed people make more mistakes. "The traffic was bad," I said, and let my voice come out slightly unsteady. I almost turned around twice. She pulled back and held my face in both hands, and her eyes moved over me with what looked like concern and was actually inventory. Checking my pupils, checking my affect, comparing me to whatever baseline she had built in her head. "You're here now," she said. "That's what matters. Come in. We have water and coffee." The room was smaller than I had imagined. A rectangular table, 6 chairs, recessed lighting set to the kind of warmth that is meant to feel calming but instead feels staged. My stepbrother was already seated at the far end of the table, and when I walked in, he looked up from his phone and gave me a tight, unconvincing smile, and then looked at the wall. He had always been like that. Not cruel, just absent. A man who managed to be present at terrible things without technically participating in them, which is its own kind of cruelty if you think about it long enough. The man I had seen in the hallway was now seated to the left of where my stepmother was guiding me. He was introduced as Dr. Ellison, described as an old friend of the family who happened to have a background in behavioral health and had offered to be present as a supportive resource. He shook my hand. His grip was slightly too firm, the way people grip when they're performing authority rather than having it. He looked at me the way I imagine someone looks at a problem they have already decided the solution to. "It's good to meet you," he said, and I could hear in the way he said it that he was already writing the first line of a document in his head. "Likewise," I said, and sat down in the chair across from my stepbrother, with my back to the door, which was where she had steered me because it was the chair farthest from the exit. My stepsister was in the room. She was sitting in the corner chair that wasn't really part of the main arrangement, the chair that said observer, not participant. And when I looked at her, I made my expression soft and a little lost, which is what her mother would expect. She looked back at me with a steadiness that nearly broke my heart. She had done it. I could tell from the way she was holding herself, the careful stillness of someone who has just done something terrifying and is waiting to find out if it mattered. The crystal pitcher sat on the credenza behind my stepmother, full of plain water. My stepmother poured herself a glass and then turned to the pitcher like it was a natural afterthought. "Can I get you some water? You look like you haven't been sleeping." She lifted it and poured before I answered, which was itself a small tell. She brought the glass and placed it directly at my right hand, square in the center of my vision, in the position of something you are expected to reach for without thinking. "Thank you," I said. I wrapped my fingers around the glass and let my hand tremble slightly. Not too much, just enough to confirm what she needed to believe. "So," my stepmother said, settling into her chair with the ease of someone sitting down at a table they have already won. "I know this is hard. I know you've been struggling. I want you to know that everything we're here to talk about tonight comes from love, from wanting to make sure you're protected, that the company is protected." "I appreciate that," I said, making my voice quiet, a little confused at the edges. Dr. Ellison leaned forward. He had a yellow legal pad in front of him and a pen he kept clicking. "It's completely normal to feel overwhelmed when managing an estate of this complexity on top of personal loss," he said, in a voice that was very carefully calibrated to sound like human warmth. "We're just here to make sure you have the support you need. Can you tell me a little bit about how you've been feeling lately?" And there it was, the clinical opening, folded into a family meeting, like a knife inside bread. I let my eyes go slightly unfocused. I looked at the table. I said, "I don't know. Some days feel okay, and then I'll lose track of something important, and it's like, I don't know. I feel like I'm losing time." My stepmother exhaled. A small sound, barely audible. Satisfaction running through her like a current she couldn't quite contain. She caught herself and rearranged it into sorrow. "I know, sweetheart," she said softly. "That's exactly what we've been seeing." My stepbrother turned to look at the wall again. His jaw was tight. Dr. Ellison was writing something on the legal pad. His pen moved quickly, which meant he had arrived with a framework already filled in and was fitting what I said into existing slots. This was not assessment. This was documentation. I looked at the water glass. They were waiting for me to drink it. I could feel the attention in the room shifting toward my hands. 3 separate people monitoring whether I would reach for it, the particular quality of stillness that settles over a room where everyone but one person is in on the plan. I picked up the glass. I held it for a moment, looking at the water the way someone might look at it if they were slightly dissociated, slightly not quite present. I set it back down without drinking. My stepmother's composure did not crack, but her eyes moved to Dr. Ellison for 1/2 second and then back to me. "You should drink something," she said. "You look pale." "In a minute," I said vaguely. The conversation continued for another 7 minutes. I gave them what they expected: halting sentences, small inconsistencies, the performance of someone struggling to maintain a clear narrative. "Doctor." Ellison filled 2/3 of a legal pad page. My stepbrother stared at a point on the wall and did not speak once. At the 9-minute mark, my stepmother checked her watch with a gesture so subtle most people would have missed it. A brief glance down, a small adjustment to her posture. A signal. I recognized it because I had watched her run client dinners with my father for years, and she always used the same gesture when she was moving a timeline forward. The conference room door opened behind me. I heard it before I turned. 2 sets of footsteps, soft-soled shoes, which told me everything about who makes a practice of walking quietly through hotel hallways. "She's been showing significant symptoms throughout the conversation, Doctor," Ellison said, to someone behind me, his voice shifting to a register. I hadn't heard from him yet. Flat, operational, stripped of the performed warmth. "I think we need to move quickly." "For her own safety." "I agree," my stepmother said. I stood up. The chair scraped back, and the water glass tipped and spilled across the table, and my stepbrother finally looked at me. His face was complicated in a way I didn't have time to read. "Sit down," Dr. Ellison said, reaching for something beside his legal pad. "A case. The kind that closes with a small metal clasp. This will be easier if you cooperate. I'm going to need everyone to stop exactly where they are," I said, and my voice was not trembling anymore. The room went still. I reached into my blazer pocket and placed my phone on the table face up. The screen showed a live call, 42 minutes and counting, with a name the people in this room would recognize immediately. "My attorney has been listening to this meeting since before I walked through the door," I said, "as has the hotel's head of security, who is currently positioned in the hallway with 2 officers from the district's financial crimes unit. The officers have been waiting outside since approximately 10 minutes before this meeting began." Dr. Ellison's hand had stopped moving. "The water in this glass," I said, gesturing to the spilled glass without touching it, "is plain tap water. The original contents of that pitcher were replaced before I arrived by someone in this room who was protecting me." I looked at my stepsister. She was gripping the armrest of her chair with both hands, but her chin was level and her eyes were clear. She has the original contents in a sealed container in her bag, which she will hand to the officers outside. My stepmother stood up. The composed, benevolent mask was still technically on her face, but it had gone rigid, the way a mask looks when the person behind it is feeling something too large to hide completely. "This is a family meeting," she said. "You are being paranoid. I have a time-stamped medical evaluation from 6:14 this evening confirming I am sober, cognitively oriented, and show no indicators of psychiatric emergency." I slid the envelope across the table toward Dr. Ellison. He didn't pick it up. "I also have a certified copy of the conservatorship petition you filed 2 weeks ago, the contract with the patient transport company you engaged, and the prior 6 declarations signed by Dr. Ellison for clients represented by the same attorney. My attorney obtained them this afternoon." "You don't know what you're doing," my stepmother said. And now the warmth was completely gone, and what was underneath it was smaller and harder and frightened, and I found that I did not feel satisfaction or anger or grief looking at it. I felt something closer to clarity. The kind that comes when you finally see a thing for exactly what it is. "I know precisely what I'm doing," I said. "I've known for 3 hours." The door opened behind me. My stepbrother pushed back from the table and put his hands flat on its surface, palms down, saying something with that gesture that I chose to file away and examine later. Not guilt exactly, not innocence, something in between that I would have to decide what to do with when this was over. Dr. Ellison began to explain to the 2 officers entering the room that there had been a misunderstanding, that he was a medical professional responding to a family concern, that he had documentation. The officers were polite and unmoved. My stepmother did not say anything more to me. She looked at me once, when they guided her toward the door, and the look was the look I had grown up trying to interpret, searching for the warmth I thought was underneath it, the version of her that was capable of something like love. It had taken me until tonight to fully understand that the warmth was not underneath. The warmth was always the performance. What was underneath was only this: a person who had looked at my father's life's work and decided it belonged to her. I looked away first. My stepsister crossed the room to me while the officers were still sorting through Dr. Ellison's credentials, and my attorney's voice was coming through my phone asking me if I was okay. She didn't say anything when she reached me. She just stood next to me, close enough that her shoulder pressed against mine, and I put my arm around her and held on. "I have the vial," she said quietly. "I've had it in my bag since I switched the water. I didn't dump it. I saved it. I thought you might need it." I looked at her. 16 years old, raised in a house where love came with conditions and silence was the price of safety, and she had stood in a hotel bathroom alone and made a choice to be braver than the adults around her. "You thought right," I said. My attorney came through the door 4 minutes later, still in his coat, his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead the way they always were when he'd been working fast. He shook my hand. He looked at me for a long moment the way people look at you when they're relieved to see you still standing. "I need you to know," I said, "that you saved my company tonight. Your father saved the company," he said simply. He called me 6 weeks before he died and asked me to build a monitoring alert on certain legal filings connected to his estate. He told me if anything came through in her name to call you before I called anyone else. He paused. He knew. Not everything, but enough. He was trying to give you a head start. I had not cried since the kitchen floor. I cried now, standing in a hotel conference room in a blazer I had bought because my father always said to dress for the meeting you want, not the meeting you were invited to. My father, who had built something that worked and left it to me and then, quietly, from inside an illness he was already losing, tried to build one more thing, a safety net cast far enough out to catch me before I fell all the way. I missed him so much I couldn't breathe for a moment, and then I breathed. The weeks that followed were not easy. There is no version of this story where they are. My stepmother retained an attorney, which she was entitled to do, and the process moved through its necessary stages with the slow, grinding patience of anything that runs on paperwork and institutional time. Dr. Ellison surrendered his credentials as part of a negotiated agreement that I was not involved in and did not lose sleep over. My stepbrother called me once, 3 weeks later, and did not apologize exactly but said something in the vicinity of an apology, something that acknowledged he had seen what was happening and had chosen the wrong kind of quiet. I told him I heard him. I didn't tell him what I planned to do with that, because I hadn't decided yet, and I am learning slowly, with a lot of help that I don't have to decide everything right now. My stepsister lives with me now. We moved her out of that house on a Tuesday morning while her mother was meeting with attorneys, 2 carloads of clothes and books, and the small collection of things she had accumulated in 16 years of living with someone who taught her that her value was conditional. She cried in the car for most of the drive and then she didn't. And we got coffee and sat in my living room and talked until 2 in the morning about everything except the thing that had just happened, which was, it turned out, exactly what we both needed. She is enrolled in a school that she chose. She is learning what it feels like to want something and have someone simply say, yes, here, try it. She is learning what it feels like to trust the version of herself that knew, even at 16, which way was right when everything around her was pointing the other direction. And the company, my father's company, his 16 years and 31 employees and something that still works because he built it to, is mine. Fully, legally, uncontestably mine. I walked into that building on a Thursday morning and sat down at his old desk, which I had left untouched for months, and I opened his desk drawer and found, because he was the kind of man who thought of the things you didn't know you needed, a handwritten note that said, only this. You were always going to be fine. I just wanted to make sure you knew where the tools were. I have not moved that note. I don't think I will. What I learned from the worst year of my life is this. The people who want to convince you that you are broken will always choose the most careful and patient version of the lie. They will speak it quietly and consistently, in the register of concern, so that by the time you begin to doubt them, you have already learned to doubt yourself first. They rely on your willingness to extend grace, your desire to believe in the best version of the people closest to you. Those are not weaknesses. They are the things that make you the person worth protecting. Know the difference between someone helping you hold yourself together and someone who needs you to believe you are falling apart. Dollar is love. The other is a long con. And if you ever find yourself standing in your kitchen with your keys in your hand and a warning lighting up your screen, put the keys down. Make the call. Trust the person who reached for you before you knew you were falling. They might be the reason you don't.